welcome. Thank you for joining us. Kamala's America, the nightmare scenarios. I'm talking to a lot of very smart people who have some pretty dire warnings regarding the possibility of Kamala Harris taking office in, well, January. So I have with me today William Wolfe, and he's the executive director for the Center for Baptist Leadership. So before I ask you the big question, tell me a little bit more about what matters to you. What is the most important thing for you in terms of, well, I guess this race?
Well, I'll be honest, it's hard to pick one. For many years, evangelicals, conservative Christian voters have been what people have called single issue voters. And they
Mm.
voted predominantly on whether they're going to vote for a pro-life candidate that represents a pro-life platform or not. But at this stage in America's decline, I've said that we have, quite frankly, quite a few single issues that are rising to the top. So hard to pick, but I will say that, quite frankly, one of the most important things for me as a Christian, as a husband, as a father, is voting for a candidate that I believe will allow me to continue to live my life in America as I'm constitutionally empowered to do, with the freedom of speech, with the freedom of religion, with the freedom to raise my children as Christians without fear of government interference, without fear of them being poisoned or warped by transgender ideology.
Mm.
And quite frankly, I am seriously concerned that Kamala and Tim Walz represent a severe shift in America away from our constitutional order of liberty and freedoms towards what's sort of a new techno-totalitarian transgender Marxism. And that is at the top of the ticket.
Yeah, I agree with you because now it's as if we've become single issue voters, just the single issue of save us from a socialist totalitarian nightmare because it encompasses everything that you just said and even more. Uh, and so as Christians, we have a particular responsibility, I think, to protect our children, our families, and the rule of law because that is a biblical precept, and so many other concepts within and commandments within the scriptures. So the what does America look like if Kamala takes power? What do you see? You can put it from the perspective of day one, first 100 days, after 4 years. What are the great threats of actual, well, actions that you would take?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And one of the things that frankly surprises me with so much of the American electorate is that we actually have a pretty crystal clear preview as to what the future of every state in America might look like if Kamala takes office. And we get that in a sequence that I call California, Canada, and China. First, we'll look more like California, then we'll look more like Canada, and finally, we'll look like China. And so what I'm concerned about is a future in which under a Kamala and Walz administration, that first of all, freedom of speech would be greatly suppressed. She is on record saying she essentially wants to get rid of X under the leadership of Elon Musk. It poses a major threat to their regime. So stifling freedom of speech, that means conservatives, Christians, or just quite frankly, patriotic Americans who respect the biological differences between men and women wouldn't have the opportunity to speak freely. I could see increased political prosecutions against those that they deem to be their opponents from the Department of Justice. We have, again, a picture of this happening right now where there are pro-life protesters who are being prosecuted under the, quite frankly, ridiculous FACE Act with a grandma facing 7 years in jail. That could happen to thousands of people under the Walz-Harris administration. I could see them targeting churches seeking to revoke their tax-exempt status under the Johnson Amendment, which needs to be also overruled. And I hope Trump would push for that if he wins. I see abortion access increasing, transgender ideology continually foisted upon our families, and economic despair across America. The middle class is getting crushed, And if we get the quote unquote opportunity of economy of Kamala, which is just a code word for more big government spending and regulations, people are going to have a harder and harder time making their way up into the middle class and having successful lifestyles. And finally, I'll end with this. What might America look like 4 years after Kamala and Walz? Quite frankly, it would be unrecognizable because millions and millions more illegal immigrants would continue to stream across our open southern border, invading and taking over small towns in America, all while receiving government benefits that we don't even provide to our own veterans. And frankly, at the end of 4 years of that, the voting population of America, because they're going to let the legal immigrants vote, might be such that what we previously knew as red states have been turned into blue strongholds.
Well, frankly, that was such an excellent summary that we could practically say goodbye right now. And thank you very much. But I'm going to dig down deeper on some of those topics. That was a beautiful summary. You know, yesterday, my guest told me, and I hadn't ever quite thought of it this way. I'm Californian by birth. I was born in the Presidio, lived, my childhood in Northern California, San Francisco. I don't go back now. It's too depressing. And he said, Elizabeth, when Ronald Reagan, I hate to say it was duped because I loved Ronald Reagan so much, but by, I guess, the Democrats into doing his immigrant amnesty. Thank you. Words. I'm getting older. Anyway, immigrant amnesty, they said, and we'll never do this again. We're going to tighten things up. We just want to get these guys in because it's just unfair if we don't. Whatever their argument was, he bit and he was wrong because they were lying to him. And he said, Elizabeth, that is when California became permanently a blue state, destroyed the state of California. I had never quite put it together that clearly. And what you're saying, and I think many people agree with you, is that that is what they're doing now to the entire country. That you will end up having all the states blue enough to eliminate a true two-party system. It'll be just a uniparty system in perpetuity. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I think that is what the clear trajectory of the immigration policies of the Democrat Party is right now in America. It's quite frankly treasonous. It's also tyrannical because what they're doing is they are taking away the vote and the voice and the will and the power of native-born American citizens and replacing them with millions of migrants who are coming in from the third world. And as Donald Trump has said, all around the world, not just from South America. They're certainly coming from South America, but they're coming from all around the world. They're not individuals who share American culture, heritage, customs, and values. Many of them don't even speak English. And what the Democrat Party is doing through the mechanism of big government is giving them benefits, which is essentially buying them votes. So 4 years from now, if we've had 15 million more illegal immigrants come into our country and settle in Ohio and Georgia and other states like that, why would they vote against Florida? Why would they vote against the party that is giving them health benefits, housing benefits, food benefits, etc.? And they're doing this, I do believe, intentionally, cynically, quite frankly, evilly, in order to secure for themselves a new voting base in America that displaces, frankly, our native population. It's truly a disaster.
It's a crushing to my heart. I talk about my mother. She lives with me and has lived with me for so many years now. She's 89. And sometimes we'll start talking and she'll either be going off because she's on X or Facebook and see, the news, or she'll say, I can't take, I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm looking at my 89-year-old mother and it's crushing to her to know that the country she was born in 35, the country that she grew up in, that was such the greatest country, we've always said the greatest country because we have freedoms, not because we're the perfect people, but because we have the freedoms and the foundation that no other nation on earth has, the protections. Like England doesn't have a protection for freedom of speech. France doesn't. You know, these countries, they're relatively free, but it's just relative. And it's crushing. And I think of the heartbreak of Americans and of Christians in particular, but just MAGA patriots. And I think it's so unfair. It's so cruel. I think many people feel despair and great, great fear.
I think that's right. It is cruel, but the cruelty, unfortunately, is the point. We have to remember that the Democrat Party now has been completely transformed from what, say, your mother would have understood the Democrat Party to be of 40, 50 years ago, a party of the working class, you know, a party of unions, a party of patriots who maybe thought the government should do more to help the average individual than, say, the Republican Party thought at the time. But they've been so completely captured by these radical cultural Marxists. They're economic Marxists, they're cultural Marxists, and they now fundamentally hate white people. I mean, I'm sorry to put it so bluntly, but when I say the cruelty is the point, what I mean by that is they want to punish these, you know, intrinsically evil white colonial, you know, imperialist invaders who conquered the native lands of America 300,
Turtle Island.
400 years ago.
Turtle Island.
Yep,
I mean,
that's right. And so when they see Springfield, Ohio, when you mentioned your mother, I just couldn't help but think of the videos I've seen coming out of Springfield, Ohio, elderly individuals, a woman talking about her mother-in-law was murdered by an illegal Haitian immigrant. When they see these videos of these white individuals expressing this horror at what's happening to their communities, quite frankly, they look at it and say, good, they're getting what they deserve, give them more.
you know what I do find very heartening is that, well, as a Christian, we often in our mind go to the scriptures that speak of the separation and the wheat and the tares. And we see that there's going to be a great division. And of course, why wouldn't there be? There's light and dark, evil and righteousness. Um, and what I see is that there's a realignment, a shifting in our country whereby the Democrats who aren't socialists, who are not radical leftists, San Francisco leftists, and don't hate white people, don't hate our country, don't hate our founding fathers, actually have a brain in their head where they understand that they are living in the only country that they could for having the level of freedom that they enjoy. Those people are moving over into one direction. And many people who probably were not even very religious or people of faith are starting to be more attracted to that. I've seen many atheists because they're seeing, wait a minute, we don't want to go that direction. And maybe if the Christian ethic is what keeps us from that, maybe there's something more to it. And then on the Republican side, if you will, those that are really leftists, like Cheney or any of the number of these rhinos, as they call them, are moving over this direction. Maybe this is a good thing because now we can really identify our soulmates instead of Republicans that we're angry at all the time because they're really liberals and Democrats that we're saying, come on over here. I mean, so the realignment, what do you think about that? Is that a positive?
Yeah, well, we are certainly living through a major political realignment in America right now. And that's obviously on full display with people like RFK Jr. backing the Trump ticket, people like Tulsi Gabbard and Elon Musk backing the Trump ticket. Now, we are in an interesting position, particularly for evangelical conservatives and Christians in America who have long made home in the Republican Party, because some of these social issues, these moral and ethical issues that we value and rightly value, they are not some of the primary issues that are being brought to the front by what we could call sort of the new national populist coalition, right? So they're focusing more on immigration, trade, the economy. With someone like RFK Jr., we're getting issues like medical autonomy, personal medical autonomy and freedom, which is very important, particularly after COVID. They're not always, though, necessarily, pro-life, pro-natural marriage, traditional family conservative. So my hope as we navigate this political realignment is that we beat the communists at the ballot in November, and we do the work of helping these sort of new recruits to the Republican Party also understand the value of doing things like fighting abortion, protecting the traditional family, traditional marriage, because those are the bedrock of Western civilization.
Absolutely. And I always like to mention that there was a point in my life where I was pro-abortion. I wasn't pro-abortion for any sort of prurient reasons or um, just really bedrock evil reasons. It was just utter ignorance. I was young, right? I was raised by Phil Donahue, watching him while I did my homework in front of the TV, I guess. And I actually believed that garbage. And so I was pro-abortion. And what I try to think about is this, is just how we are with evangelizing people that are, obviously are not Christians. We try not to alienate. We try to understand that there was a day we were not believers in the one true God. There was a day when I thought abortion was perfectly acceptable, but somebody, enlightened me and I was instantly changed. And so I think that we need to be understanding that there's a transition that takes place in your heart as you come to a better knowledge of the truth.
Yeah, I think that's well put, and it's encouraging to hear your own personal testimony there. I do think that a lot of support for abortion is in part still driven by ignorance. From a Christian worldview and understanding, we do know that people are, by nature sinful, right? And so some people it's ignorance, some people it's they really do want to sin, they support the sin, and they need God to change their hearts. But, it was fascinating to hear Kamala repeat such a thoroughly debunked, nonsensical line during the debate when she said, abortion is about what a woman does with her body, to which we all know the science tells us that the body inside of a woman's body is actually not her body. It's another being worthy of equal protection under the law of life and liberty, all the promises of the Constitution. And so we have work to do there. But you're right, we need to be patient with other people as well as we go through this political realignment.
And I understand that Christians, I mean, I was a single issue voter in the respect that I wouldn't vote for somebody who is pro-abortion. But I cared, or I still do, obviously care about many other issues because we're talking about communism, socialism, Marxism, Maoism, all of those are really just different colors of the same evil. And my husband, in a column that I thought was so brilliant, he once, this is years ago, wrote that financial issues, all issues are moral issues. This is the canard about, you can't legislate morality. If the government took like 98% of your money, would that be a moral issue, that theft and that oppression and all that? And so he went down through a list of financial, economic issues, money, and showing how they were very, very clearly moral issues and that Christians should be able to take a stand. Now, when you're talking about tax at 10% or 12, that's a thing that we could argue about. But say the right to own property and not have the government confiscate it from you, that's happening all the time. And that should be something that Christians are fully against, completely against.
Well, that's well said. I've thought lately that the Democrat Party of 2024 appears to have looked at the Ten Commandments and decided they want to do the exact opposite and make it law. So first, you shall have no other gods before me. They say there is no God except for the state. And we see, obviously, I think what are blatant pagan, dark, demonic spiritual rituals being performed outside the DNC with, the bodily mutilation of healthy young men, getting unnecessary vasectomies, abortion truck, etc. So they say there's no one true God. There's whatever God you want to worship. They don't care at all about taking the Lord's name in vain. The Ten Commandments say, thou shalt not murder. And they say, we want to sign Roe v. Wade back into law. The Ten Commandments say, thou shalt not covet. And they want to say, we're going to tax unrealized capital gains. Right? The Ten Commandments say, honor your father and mother, and the Democrats want to make the total destruction of the heritage that we have inherited here in the United States of America a key part of their policy platform. And so it really is. Now, I don't think the Republican Party is perfect by any stretch. I have a lot of complaints and criticisms with them. And yet I've put it like this, though. There's one major political party that is obviously hostile to truth, goodness, and beauty, and Christian ethics and virtues and values. And there is one party, though imperfect, perhaps seriously imperfect, that is willing to work with us and welcome us and pursue those things, even if imperfectly. And that's the situation we have today as we go into the November election.
When you remarked about how, okay, the Republican Party is imperfect, so true, so am I, so are you. How would anybody think, especially Christians, how would any Christian believe that you could put a bunch of imperfect, to put it nicely, people together in an organization, and that the organization can come out flawlessly perfect? And that, I've got so many things. I mean, I wish I could take notes and listen to you. I can't, so I'm going to forget some stuff that was really good I wanted to drill down on. But let's talk a little bit about Christians who say in 2016, 2020, 2024 now, that they can't vote for Donald Trump. I had a major problem with this in 2020 when Pastor John Piper, can never remember his last name. I don't know why, because I'm getting older. But anyway, John Piper, 2 weeks before the election, he puts out a piece to, his million followers on X, it was Twitter then, I think, and he says, he can't vote for Donald Trump. And he essentially, in this column or post, whatever, equated mean tweets, crude, rude, whatever, to, killing babies. And I did like a 2-hour ranting live stream, just myself. I had no guests talking about this because I was horrified. Firstly, it was strategically released right before the election. But then to equate Donald Trump's many inadequacies or failures, and I'm not going to go, why do I need to go in it to tear somebody down? Because I don't need somebody to go and tear me down every single inadequacy I have or sin that I've ever committed. Grant all that. But how can Christians say, I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump? Isn't that just a vote for a godless socialist who would destroy the family, destroy private property, destroy the Constitution, and basically ultimately put us on the final leg of enslaving Americans?
Yeah, well, I remember that article very well from John Piper, and I do believe that John Piper has been a faithful minister of God's word in many ways. He preaches powerfully, and I think the Lord has used him to save many. But one of the problems, Elizabeth, that we're dealing with right now in America is we don't have very good, clear political theology coming from many pastors. They kind of step outside of their comfort zone when they start, trying to speak to political issues. And what I think Piper did there, here's the real mistake, is that Piper compared Donald Trump's personal moral failings to Joe Biden's demonstrably wicked policy proposals. And he's misunderstanding what we're doing when we vote for a president. When we vote for a president, we're not ultimately voting for the character of that person, although that is important. And during the moral majority, I understand that there was a movement, and I love the moral majority movement in America. And maybe they got something wrong too, where they tried to make it too much about the character of the candidate and not as much about his policy and his platforms. But the thing is that Piper released that after 4 years of a Donald Trump record in which Trump had done good things at the governmental level that he's supposed to be doing. So whatever his personal shortcomings were in his own life, he had actually ruled pretty well as our president. And so those are not comparable categories. When it comes to time to get into the voting booth, the main thing we want to compare is what are the policy platforms of the two parties in front of us, and how are they going to wield that power that they are invested with as the president of the United States. So when it comes to Biden and Trump, I thought that was a no-brainer. So bottom line, I'll wrap it up, is that's a categorical confusion that John Piper made, comparing two things that should not be compared.
Sorry, when you said a mistaken category, the issue is an apologist will often, a Christian apologist will often point to categorical or miscategorizations in arguments about the faith. Right? Well, that's a category error. And he did make a very serious one there. I also, though, looked, and this is not to go drill down on John Piper, but this, I want our viewers and listeners to be thinking about this. Months later, or whenever when Roe v. Wade was overturned, I went and looked at Beth Moore and John Piper's social media. They're very active. It was crickets. I was shocked because what I really thought was, not with Beth Moore. I didn't think anything possible would come out of her on this, but I thought that Piper might come in and say, you know what? Big enough a man, he wouldn't have to say that. But I mean, I understand that I've said many harsh things, and deservedly so, perhaps, about Donald J. Trump. But I must say here that if anyone else was in office, today we'd be living with Roe v. Wade. And so I must congratulate the president for his, the work that resulted in righteousness. Even just throw the dog a bone. And there was no, I didn't ever want to lie about, slander him. So I checked it for some time and went back because I thought surely he said something. No. So what do you say to Christians? Pointedly, I'm asking you, because I know what I'd say, but I want to hear what you'd say to a Christian who says, I would rather not go to the polls at all, not cast any votes, than vote for Donald Trump, even if that means that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will take office. What would you say?
Yeah, I would say, dear Christian, that is a dereliction of your duty, both as a Christian and as an American citizen. Voting is not a sacrament. It is not a holy thing that we engage in the United States of America. It's not. Voting is a stewardship. And so what I mean by that is I would look at, say, the parable of the talents in Matthew 25, and I would say that look what happens to the different stewards here. One gets 10 and he uses it. One gets 5 and he uses it. One gets 1 and he buries it. And then who gets judged and who gets praised? It's the unfaithful steward who buries his talent that gets judged. Well, the way that I view our ability to vote for our leadership in the United States of America is as a political talent given unto us by God that we need to be faithful to use. And so at the very least, you have to get out and vote. Now, I do think you should vote for Donald Trump in this upcoming election because I think that is the most effective vote that you can cast in order to love your neighbors as yourself, even if you don't love everything that Trump is doing, or even if you have some very severe and perhaps due criticisms for the way he's talked about pro-life issues, etc. of late. Still, love your neighbor and vote against communism. I really do. I think that one of the reasons we're in this position we are in America today is because American Christians have pulled themselves out of the public square, and they've not done what they should be doing to be active in their communities. Now, a lot of that is due to, of course, increasing secular hostility in our country, to which Christians, I would say, grow a spine. Even if they don't love you, get back out there. And so I would say, Christian, do not bury your political talent of a vote for the next 4 years of the direction of this country. Love your neighbor, love your family, and vote against communism, if nothing else, by casting an effective vote for Donald Trump.
Well, Tim Walz would say, Socialism is just neighborliness.
Yes. I wrote a whole article about that at the Freedom Center out of Liberty University.
Good for you because whatever you said, it had to be said. I loved your use of the parable of the talents because that I think is one of the most apt uses of that parable that I've ever heard. I really love it because I've heard people point to Romans 13. We won't go too far down this road of theology, but go down or refer to Romans 13. And I thought, and I've heard some people say, well, Paul was executed probably under Nero, and he didn't say stand up for your rights and do this and do that. And, it's sort of this message of, well, if Paul couldn't stand up for his rights with Nero, then we shouldn't be doing the same. But I'm thinking, wait a minute, he's living under an imperialist dictatorship. And how can we say that that would apply to us today? He had no other choice. To go against Nero would have been impossible anyway. We've been given a vote, and therefore it is something that the Lord has given us in this country, and we ought to use it appropriately. So, yeah, I agree with you 100%. Do you think the border is a moral issue?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the issues, and you're clearly familiar with some of the evangelical compromisers across, like Beth Moore and Russell Moore and others. But the border is absolutely a moral issue, but it's not a moral issue in the way that so many leading Christian evangelical figures talk about it. It's actually a moral issue in the way that Donald Trump talks about it, right? It is a fundamental failure of the government to protect its citizens to let our border be open. That is an act of immorality. You can say it's a dereliction of duty on behalf of our government, and we should not support that. Upholding the rule of law is a fundamental Christian principle. It's what helped build Western civilization, English common law, the rights of the citizens for life, liberty, and property, the responsibility of the government to defend those rights, life, liberty, and property. It's a grave evil being perpetrated upon the American people, and Christians should be at the forefront defending their neighbors, their American citizen neighbors, in a rightly ordered hierarchy of love. Augustine talks about this. It's called the Ordo Amoris, the right ordering of loves. We see this in Scripture too, where it tells us that if you do not provide for your own family, you're worse than a non-believer. Of course, there's a general Christian love that we should have for all people. And let me just finish up with one last theological point here. The parable of the Good Samaritan. If in America I came across an illegal immigrant who was in some sort of distress, as a Christian in that moment, I should absolutely help him. I should love him. I should welcome him. I shouldn't be prejudiced against him because of his country or his ethnicity. But that's fundamentally different than what the duty of the government is to protect us as citizens. So our job in loving an immigrant when we meet them in perhaps a situation of distress is not a policy command from Scripture to have open borders. And so Trump is actually far more Christian on the immigration and border issue than many of our leading evangelical Christians are.
Good. And I will trumpet that Trump's theology is trumping other people, Christians' theology. And then we deport them, right? After the Good Samaritan, and then we deport him. I'm joking. Anyway.
Well, no, actually, on that point, I think there's a great Christian case to be made for mass deportation.
Oh, I'm all there.
We have limited resources in this country. Those resources are drawn from the taxpayers who are working for them. They should go first and foremost to American citizens. And let me make this point too. So many of the people who have come to America are people who have failed to do their duty in their own home country.
Yes.
It would actually be loving to them and to their own home country to send them back so that they can do the work needed to make their lives better where they come from.
Where you go with this because because I agree with you. That's why I would love it. But anyway, the idea of, let's just look at Haiti for a moment. They bring in 150,000 people who do not speak English and live in a country where the rule of law is utterly absent and has been for perhaps even centuries, and where voodoo and witchcraft and the slaughtering of animals in the streets and being covered with blood and eating cats is part of their culture. But you know what? That's not American culture. And when you import 150,000 and concentrate them in in large populations overwhelming the native population, you are fundamentally changing their culture and putting them at risk. And I do not believe that we should be importing, if you will, cannibals. I don't believe voodoo witchcraft practitioners should be imported, jihadists who advocate for Sharia. I mean, there are whole categories of people that God love them. I hope the best for their lives, but they don't belong in America fundamentally changing